Hello and welcome to this afternoon's sponsor lightning talk brought to you by Digital Science. I'm delighted to welcome Isabel Thompson, Head of Data Platforms at Dimensions, which is part of Digital Science. And Isabel is going to tell us about Dimensions on Google BigQuery. Isabel, over to you.
Thanks, Warren. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're here today to talk about how to solve a set of challenges on the route to open science. In my view, one of the sticking points in unraveling any complex challenge is having the right information or evidence to move the conversation forward, to move the problem forward. And in general, that's why I'm so happy to be working at Dimensions, is because we spend a lot of time trying to think about how we can support research in all those different ways, including, perhaps in particular, to make it more accessible and open. I'm here today to share with you one of our latest attempts at doing that and providing information for people more easily and more accessibly, and that is Dimensions on Google BigQuery. I'm ambitiously going to share some background on Dimensions for people who aren't familiar with it, then explain BigQuery, and then attempt a very brief live demo all in 10 minutes. So let's see how that goes down, shall we? Okay, so a lot of you will be familiar with Dimensions already, but perhaps not everyone. So the reason we made Dimensions in the first place was to help researchers make a difference, because we all know that research changes lives for the better. We wanted to allow people across the research sector to ask and answer all kinds of different questions. Researchers have increasingly complex lives. Research administrators are trying to implement research strategies. The policymakers are making strategies. The publishers are trying to disseminate the research itself. And all of this is involving hundreds and hundreds of decisions for which you have to have the right information and context. So historically, people have relied on publications and citations for making a lot of decisions about the research lifecycle. And this, I believe, is challenge number one on the route to open science, because it doesn't reflect the full richness of the sector. And launching Dimensions in 2018, one of the goals was to open up the bigger picture so that more careful and thought out through decisions could be made just by virtue of having access to information like grants linked to publications. Helps you see and track how different funder policies might start to support the types of open publishing that we want to see. And then challenge two, when you have data, is in fact extracting insight to get to any meaningful information to help you make a decision. So if I am trying to explain to someone what Dimensions is all about, I'll often show them this graph, which shows the main objects that are in Dimensions. But usually, if you're trying to do an analysis, it's not the objects that you're interested in, it's the links between them, because that's where the insight really resides. And so in that case, this image is in fact more useful. Typically, we're interested in the publications that are associated with a grant, the individual researchers that have received those grants and have published from it, how many are open access, so we're interested in the fields belonging to each of these objects. We're then interested in whether publications that are open are more likely to be cited in patents, and how that might potentially influence other related things like clinical trials or policy. And so you start wanting to move around this graph to explore the links, and that's where you find the more real and deep understanding of the research environment. But challenge three, that's a highly simplified diagram on the previous page. And there are many different ways that you can explore something as complex as the data that relates to the research ecosystem. And different users absolutely need different tools to do that. On the one hand, we've had the web app for a couple of years, which you may be familiar with, which allows people quite easily to search and discover and explore some built-in analytical use cases. And yes, you don't need any specialized knowledge. But we've also had the API for more technical users, API users, and perhaps what you might call our pro version, which is the bulk data that we've made available to people who've wanted to explore the full data set. But that hasn't been accessible to a large number of people because it has a great technical overhead in terms of the infrastructure that you need to create and maintain. And that also comes with a cost overhead. And it simply put it out of reach of the majority of people that we work with, which is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. And so we've pondered long and hard what we can do about that. And what we're introducing today is BigQuery, which is a little bit closer to the best of all worlds in terms of analytical tools. It's providing the flexibility of the bulk data, some of the speed and ease of the API, more so in some cases, but more importantly, you can then layer over the top dashboards, automated reporting, things that are appropriate for decision makers and a much, much broader selection of non-technical stakeholders. What does that mean? We need to get to some examples here. So as I said, data must be accessible and it must be ready to go. That's our final challenge. Oh no, I've got one more challenge after that, just remembered. So many challenges in the route to open science, right? So data must be accessible and ready to go. And by that, we mean it needs to be fast, it needs to be on demand, it needs to be interoperable with existing platforms and systems that people are already using. And increasingly, it needs to be ready for analytics because custom analyses are often the only way you're going to get to the specific piece of information that will support a particular decision. And also artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches. So how does one do that with something as huge as dimensions? And what does that end up meaning for people? So trying to make something with over 46 trillion data points and billions of links accessible to people to work with in a very immediate way, to make it plug and play in a way, is a huge challenge. And so about 18 months ago, we started talking to a number of cloud providers who might be able to help us with that technical challenge. And we decided to work with Google and their BigQuery platform to bring direct access to all of the underlying data of dimensions in a format that is incredibly quick and ready to go. So enough of the challenges. What does this mean in practice? And can we see some examples, please? So what it really means is that you now have the flexibility to ask and answer all the questions that you're interested in. It gives you the ability to do calculations on platform rather than have to have the local capability and local infrastructure. And that brings not only speed and agility, but also a lot of cost effectiveness. And it also provides interoperability with other app platforms and data so that you don't have to bring in a whole set of new analytical tools in order to do the types of analyses that you've been doing for years in many cases. If you're not familiar with BigQuery, which I imagine likely the majority of you are not, it's a multi-cloud data warehouse, which means that you can take data from various sources, Google Cloud, but also across AWS and Azure, and bring it together for an analysis of interest. And it's designed for very fast analytics on massive data sets. And it eliminates the need for expensive local server infrastructure and technical resources for big data systems, as I mentioned. And what that now starts to mean is that you can view and analyze dimensions data however you want. Once you have it in this neat format, you can create reports based on the data. It also allows you to bring data that you might have in-house into contact with dimensions data in a completely private way, so that you can perform analyses that pull from both your own data and from dimensions data, and perhaps put metrics or indicators of value against it that apply both to dimensions and to your own data. If you have a local research information management system or in-house author data, for example, you can now bring the full context of dimensions into and alongside your own data. And that allows you to do much more detailed and faceted analysis. And lastly, you can do this with tools that you or your analytics teams might already be using. That includes familiar tools like Tableau, Power BI, Click, Plotly, but also a number of other tools and coding workflows that you might have in-house that you end up using to create the types of reports and dashboards that a wider set of your internal people might be using. And you can pull it together to layer up this data to meet, a huge number of use cases that really are limited somewhat more by anyone's imagination than by the technology nowadays. So yes, there's competitive intelligence, perhaps finding partners with access to funding, or to track open access behavior shifts, or create new metrics or indicators with transparency. You can pull this data together to make that useful. I'm now going to show you what that looks like in practice. If I can escape from this, here we go. Although, wait, have I had my 10 minutes? I believe that maybe I have. I can't hear anyone.
Hi, Isabel. You can have a couple more minutes.
Cool. Okay, thanks. So I will, in fact, the point I wanted to make to you was that you can connect to the BigQuery dataset in less than a minute from tools you might be using already, like Tableau. So you simply take your account, which has already been given access, and then within a minute, or perhaps even within 30 seconds, you have the data available to use, and you can now drag it in or write a query that will allow you to do some graphs and get to a particular insight that you're interested in. What might we be interested in? To name just a few things, maybe we want to understand the publishers cited by authors at your organization, how grants are breaking down across different subject matters and from different funders, perhaps in different subject areas. Do we see patterns about things that are more open or less open? Do we see, as I mentioned, that patents which are from open access papers are cited more often? And how do we see collaboration playing out, and does it support people with improved collaboration if their research is more easily accessible? There are pretty limitless questions that we can now start to answer. I think what is what's worth doing here is trying out what this looks like. We have a number of reports that are available now for people to try and to try out themselves. This is our free COVID-19 report, which you're able to access here on this link. And if you're more technically minded, you can explore the data yourself. To give you a taste of what this report looks like, it's interactive, so you can explore everything in the data set here, including, for example, publications by open access status. And if you want to explore, for example, gold papers, you can click on it and it will give you now all of the COVID-19 open papers that are purely gold open access. And now you can explore them by journal, by organization, by field of research, and anything else. And this is just one example of a report that you can build that might help you understand a topic, that might help you understand a particular organization. You can now pull this data together in order to answer the types of questions that you're approaching on a daily basis. Thanks very much. I apologize for overrunning. I was indeed over ambitious. I've spoken more slowly than I did practicing.
Okay. Thanks, Isabel. So presumably people can find you in the networking tab, or perhaps via the digital science booth in the virtual expo anyway, if they've got if they want to follow up.
Absolutely, please do.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's the end of this session. So thanks again, Isabel. And if you're with us live this afternoon, a reminder, there is now a short networking break. It's now slightly shorter than 10 minutes. And we'll resume with a session on feedback from the early workshop at 4 p.m. UK time. So be sure to join us then by clicking on the workshop feedback item in the schedule. We'll see you shortly.